at Lucasfilm of what
Eccolo qua, fai ok?
photos of the instruments of a X-wing look like,
Ok,
and also photos of a real X-wing cockpit. And you could see, actually up close, it wasn't as impressive as it was in the movie, because you could see all these little random knobs that have been glued on or pasted on, but it was still kind of fun. So I studied the photographs and figured, okay, I'm going to make my own. And I adapted it for the Atari 5200. And here's my drawing. And here's how it looked in the game. And it worked. We did have the struts, like you in an X-wing, so you could actually feel like you're inside of a cockpit. So the game, here's a snippet from the game. It's funny, there are magazines that are saying that these are the best graphics come out of the games industry. And in the meantime, people inside of our parent company, the computer division, were saying that these were the worst graphics to ever come out of Lucasfilm. So like, at the time they were working with anti-aliasing to create smooth lines when you had not enough pixels to make really smooth lines. And we didn't have the color space to do that. So I have these super jagged window struts there. And one of the working titles of the game was Behind Jaggy Lines, because the lines were jaggy. And that's actually the name of the monsters, the monster alien that we have in the game. So the idea is you fly around, you find pilots that have been shot down, you stop, pick them up, they come running towards your ship, they knock on the door, you have to open your airlock to let them in, and later on you find out why that's important. You have gun placements that you shoot. Green head. Okay. So I was basically, a hippie, a pacifist at heart. In my original design, I didn't have any guns. It wasn't going to be a shooting game. The idea was you would fly around these mountainous valleys, and through quick maneuvers, you get the enemy planes or ships to follow you, and you get them to crash into mountainsides, and that was it. So you do it through evasion and trickery. So I kind of wanted to make a non-violent game. I don't want to be shooting stuff. So I ended up, I realized pretty soon that this was not going to be a good idea for a video game. We showed the games to George Lucas. He came into our offices and had about 20 minutes to demonstrate them to him, and he played the game and said, "Where's the fire button?" And said, there actually is no fire button. So he asked me if that was something that really served gameplay, or was it served my own personal values and beliefs? And I had to be honest and say, well, it was really more my personal beliefs. So I added a fire button. And of course, in retrospect, that made the game much better. I don't think my idea of crashing enemy planes in the mountains by having them follow you, although I see that in like Fast and Furious movies all the time, that wasn't going to work in an arcade game. And it was also George's idea to have the aliens. I mean, he said, let's add some tension. What if not all the time that when you pick up a pilot, it's actually a pilot. It might be one of the aliens in disguise. So we went with this idea. Gary Winnick, who is the artist on this game, came up with the Jaggies, the Jaggy Warrior. This is what it looks like without pixels, if you ever wanted to wonder what he really looked like. The idea was that we would keep the monster secret, and that was a huge challenge. We got Atari to agree to not include it in any of their marketing materials or ads. In the manual, we alluded to it in the back. If something bad had happened to one of the pilots, we don't know what it is. And we actually don't show the Jaggy until level 8. So you're playing the game for 8 levels and getting very complacent, actually opening the airlock before the knock because you were getting impatient. And eventually he shows up, and this is considered probably the first jump scare in a video game. And I still get emails from people describing their experience the first time that they saw the Jaggy pop up. People falling out of their chairs or yelling, or unfortunately a 5-year-old kid running out of the house yelling, "Mommy, there's a monster in my computer," and things like that.
Yes, we might say it is spooky still nowadays.
Yeah, well, I remember playtesting this for hours and hours, and I even knew the algorithm that would determine the frequency of when it would pop up and what was likely to happen. And I'd still would get a slight adrenaline rush every time I landed, just knowing that I had to be ready to push the button to kill him before he broke through the windshield. So that was fun. And I'll read this statement from someone. I first played Rescue on Fractalus when I was in college. One night when I was alone in my darkened dorm room, I was playing it for the first time. It was around midnight and I hadn't slept in almost 2 days. When the Jaggy jumped on the windshield, I let out a scream and that woke up my neighbors on either side of me, and I fell out of my chair. My neighbors came knocking on my door, wondering what the hell happened. That's a gaming memory I'll always cherish. So we asked Industrial Light and Magic, or ILM, to create the images for the box covers and the manuals. By this time, by 1983, ILM had won about 5 Academy Awards for visual effects. So they built the models and we had a photo shoot. And this is the actual cockpit they built. And I got to be in the cockpit. I'll show you that in a second, but they made it look like it had been shot down. It's Lauren Peterson, Wesley Seeds, and Barbara Alfonso, who are ILM model builders. They also built miniatures. That's Peter on the left, me, and then Dave Levine. And these are models they built that were then shot for the various parts of the manual. The cover, the box cover, and you can see, like, here's the looks much better photographed with correct lighting, but this is your Valkyrie fighter that you're supposed to be flying, which was actually built probably from a series of real model kits and put together to make it look like a different plane. There's the Jaggy saucer and a rotophile from Ball Blazer, and you can see the cover for the rotophile. They projected a grid on the back of it to make it look like that. There was actually a composite of multiple images. The saucer, Wesley, who did the saucer, let me go back in a second. Oh, let's see if I can get back there. He was so excited to be able to build something that wasn't an X-Wing or TIE fighter, because that's what he'd been doing for the last 5 years, that he went really crazy and gave it all this detail and made it look amazing. And in the manual, all you see is a tiny little saucer up in the upper right corner there on the front. And that plus inside the manual where it showed up in place was it. So all that detail probably went to waste, except that I actually got to keep it in my office while I was there. So that was kind of fun. So what happened to the computer division? Well, in 1986, George sold it to Steve Jobs for $10 million, and it became Pixar, and went on to, as we know, create dozens of award-winning films, which I love. Lauren Carpenter became their chief scientist, ILM did create their own internal group, but Pixar really wanted to be doing original movies, and that was the only way they could do that, was to leave and create their own company. So people know why these two people are in a picture together. It's Jim Henson and George Lucas. 1986, along with David Bowie, they worked on a film called Labyrinth. And this was, they came to us maybe 6 months, 8 months before the film was released, and asked whether we'd be interested.
TriStar Pictures announces the collaboration.
Interested in doing a game based on this. I'll show you the coming attraction first.
And Dark Crystal.
Where you go with a head like that?
George Lucas, creator of the Star Wars saga. And one of the most innovative forces in modern entertainment, David Bowie. Together, they will take you into a dazzling world of fantasy and adventure.
There's nothing to be afraid of.
A world where anything seems possible, and nothing is what it seems.
Everything I've done for you. I move the stars with no one.
The world of Labyrinth.
So, since we weren't allowed to do Star Wars movies, this was the first time we had a chance to actually do a film based on a film. Since Lucasfilm was the producer on the film, they offered it to us. And we figured, okay, if we do well on this, then maybe they'll let us do Star Wars at some point. And all we got to see was some video. We read the script, but since the film was in production, we really couldn't get a full sense of the entire film. So in '86, a bunch of us went to London for a week of brainstorming. And we got to meet with Douglas Adams, who is also a friend of Jim Henson's. And so Douglas sat in all of our brainstorming sessions. And that was an amazing experience. He was endlessly creative. I was mostly taking notes and contributing when I could, but I think I felt pretty intimidated because I actually knew his books. And I kept saying, wow, that's Douglas Adams right there sitting next to me, being very witty. And a bunch of his ideas got into the game. He had the idea of starting it as a text adventure, since this was really early in the graphic adventure era. And what was mostly popular in the field of adventure games were text adventures. He figured, okay, let's start with a text adventure, and then kind of like an homage to the Wizard of Oz, open it up into a graphic adventure. So like in the Wizard of Oz, where it starts off in black and white, and then when Dorothy goes through the door, it becomes all full color. Here we would start with text adventure and then go into a graphic adventure at some point. So we had the issue of how do you do a game where people may have seen the movie or may not have seen the movie. We didn't want people who'd seen the movie to have whoops, let me go back a second. we didn't want people who had seen the movie to have a big advantage, but we also didn't want the movie to spoil the game. So we used a lot of the environments and some of the similar puzzles, but had to do little twists on them to make it work. So here's some footage from the game. This game released on the C64. So by this point, we were no longer doing Atari games. Those Atari computers were kind of on their way down. So here's text adventure. We didn't have time to do a parser. We figured it wouldn't be we wouldn't have time to do a really thorough parser, have the computer understand what you're trying to type. So we came up with this slot machine interface where on the left you have the verb and on the right you'd have the object you're having it work on, which is kind of a precursor to the point and click interfaces we use later. So here you are at the movie theater, then Jared comes on the screen and ends up inviting you into the, basically bringing you into the labyrinth, and you have to find your way out before a certain amount of time elapsed. And we actually had a real-time clock tracking you on this 13 hours. There are a bunch of firsts for us in this. We had scalable cell animation. So we didn't, it worked okay. We had slides, we had side scrolling that was very smooth. Charlie Kellner was the technical director on this, and he was the one who implemented all of the side scrolling and the scaling there. You can see it like right there. And fortunately, the whole game was written in 6502 assembly. So each thing had to be, each puzzle had to be hand coded. There was no overarching language to make it easier to do this. So let me go on. So interestingly, the movie at the time didn't do all that well. I think later it became a cult hit, but at the time it wasn't very popular. And as a result, the game didn't get a lot of money put towards it for marketing. So there probably aren't a lot of people who actually knew the game from back then, although apparently you can still play it with emulators if you get a hold of it. So in 1985, a games group, which had been in downtown San Rafael, packed up and we moved to Skywalker Ranch. And that was an amazing experience being there. The ranch was on, I think the primary part was 50 acres, but I think George had like 500 acres. Here's a Google Maps view of the ranch. You can see the main building complex there, where the red arrow was the main house. I'll show you a picture of that afterwards. We were out in the back in what was called the stable house. The whole ranch was built as if it had been there for 150 years, with the whole backstory describing the original sea captain who built the ranch with his fortune, how each, every few decades or so, a new building or a new wing would be added. And our building was supposed to have been the place where the horses were kept. And it was made out of much rougher wood and had an interior area where I guess there would have been a water trough for the horses to drink water. That number I got to reuse later in one of the games I think I'll show you, but that's the street address. There's the main house. The library was an amazing room. Watch for this staircase later on, which we used several times in other games. We could go here though and just either ask librarians for reference material for any of the games we were working on, or sit there in front of the fire in really nice couches in the fireplace and do our work if we need to. We had our own fire department because it was required in order to serve, because we were so far away from anything else that was required. This is the tech building, which is supposedly a winery that had been converted. And this is actually where Skywalker Sound lives. And there's huge sound stages in there for orchestras and Foley rooms. And there's the stable house where we were from the outside. And this is my office. There's Ron Gilbert and Noah Faustine. At this point, we're working on Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which we'll come back to. And there in the back behind my head, you can see these two pictures. When I first got to Lucasfilm, I was taken to this closet, which was filled with production paintings by Ralph McQuarrie. And these are all original paintings. These are the ones that were done as concept drawings for the movies. So they said, okay, which ones do you want? So I chose 3 of them for my office, and these are 2 of them. And I was able to look them up afterwards and find them online with, because they ended up in art books and everything. But this was my inspiration, like over my shoulder all the time. This is what we have to match in terms of expectations. Here's the crew around that time. You can see some people you might recognize. It's Ron Gilbert with the blue and purple striped shirt. Noah Faustine on the far right. So in 1986, going back to graphic adventures, Ron had been playing the Sierra Online's graphic adventures and making a list of what he thought worked and didn't work. And he came up with his own list of do's and don'ts. Sierra was famous for killing you, like very often, quite often. Like the whole pacing of the game was you do something, you die, you'd have to remember what you did, you load a save game, and then avoid doing it the next time. So we decide, okay, let's not kill the players, or if we do kill them, let's not do it arbitrarily. Let's not do it randomly. Let's make sure it's, if you're going to jump out of an airplane without a parachute, you're probably going to die. But if you pick up a piece of broken glass from a mirror, you aren't going to cut yourself and bleed to death. So we try to change the philosophy of how games were, and actually make it more fun by not having you have to metagame by constantly saving it every time. So no arbitrary puzzles. We want our puzzles to make a lot of sense. The idea of being stuck on a puzzle, being stuck was okay, but if once you learn the solution, you realize you never would have succeeded in solving it, then that's kind of unfair. That it feels like it's made up in order to almost like sadistically challenge the player. And we didn't want to do that. And try not to do busy work. Try to, like, if you have to go through a maze once, second time through, don't make them go through again, pop into the end. I think we didn't do that till later, but that was something we started realizing it's not fun to do these boring things. And no guess the parser, so we didn't have a parser. Ron had a great article he wrote about this in 1989, and he has it on his website at that URL. So Ron set up a new environment, and he created a new scripting system, script creation utility for Maniac Mansion, which was the first game that he created it for. We called it Scum. And the idea was make it easier for the programmer to do it and also make it easier to port the game to other platforms. So some of the features that Scum had was that you could build sentences in the game by pointing on the verb and object on the screen. So first point and click interface. We had some of that in Labyrinth, but really not that much. Click where you want the character to go rather than steering with cursor keys. So Sierra, you basically are using your arrow keys to drive the character around, and we figured that's, you know, why make it complicated? Just tell the character where you want him to go and let him or her figure out how to get there. And we came up with cutscenes or these little interactive, non-interactive movies to advance the plot, show you what's happening elsewhere in the game, maybe. And do multitasking, multiple scripts running in the background at the same time to keep track of things. And the language itself is very, very readable. Here's an example. Walk actor would be the command, razor the character, and say to object, say microwave oven. And you can figure out what that's exactly supposed to do. Wait for actor, razor. Tell razor to do a reach animation, like reaching out her with her arm. Do a break here. So that means pause it to let other scripts do whatever they're doing. And then turn on the oven and have razor say a line. Here's a script for animating a clock. So you basically have a do loop, change the state, play the sound, wait for 60 jiffies or 1 second, and then do it with it turned off. And to launch this in the game, when you come into this room, you just have a command called start script clock tick, and that's all you had to do. And it would just keep running until you left the room. So these are some of the concept drawings that Gary Winnick did. Gary and Ron were the designers on this game. Ron took about 9 to 12 months to develop the Scum system. He actually first started coding in 6502 and realized this was going to take forever to do. So Chip Morningstar, one of our people, suggested doing a compiler, an interpreter, P-code interpreter. Ron has kind of a wacky sense of humor, Ron and Gary do, and tended to get a little edgy, and we thought it was great, but the back of the box actually created problems for Toys R Us, which is a huge toy chain here in the United States. And if you look at all these words, you know, which one would you think they would object to? Greed, power, mutants. No, it was the word lust. So we had to change the whole box in order to let them have it in the store and get rid of that word. And we had, here's a video showing some of the gameplay. So one of the things you got to do here, which made the game replayable quite a bit, was choose which of the 2 other kids you want to be on your team. Plus side was replayability. The downside was that we wanted to make sure you could win the game no matter which team you created, and each kid had different abilities. So that meant that you were actually creating, you know, orders of magnitude more complexity in testing the game to make sure everything worked properly. Once the Scum system was working at the beginning of the game, Ron asked if I would be interested in helping him code it, and I could be the original Scum scripter. And I wasn't working on a project at that point, so I said, sure. He thought it would take a couple of months to do, and I was actually on it for 6 months, and I had to leave to go on to my next project, and it still wasn't done yet. So Ron was still doing the testing and polishing on that. So here's the verb interface. Click on the word unlock, click on on the mat. Here's the spiral staircase I showed you before. So I'm going to skip at this point. So we had issues with censorship when we did the Nintendo version. In the game, it was for a good time called Edna. And that was too suggestive. So that got changed to just call Edna with the phone number. The original game had a pinup calendar on the wall. And this is how it had to get changed for Nintendo. The mummy on the right and the other calendar had to get removed. And there was a statue in the original version, which was too suggestive also. So that got, well, we tried to do the first version and they said no, so that got removed. So my next project was Zak McKracken and the Alien Mindbenders. I finished working on Maniac Mansion and had now a lot of experience working in Scum. So I wanted to do my own game this time. And I was still, very interested in new age phenomena, spirituality, psychic stuff. And that was the focus I wanted for the game. So our general manager, Steve Arnold, hooked me up with a guy named David Spangler, who was a spiritual author, teacher, and sent me up to Seattle area where David lived, and I spent a couple of days brainstorming with him and ended up creating a laundry list of every new age and spiritual thing we could think of. And we put it all into the game, and it was my job when I came back after the 2 days of brainstorming to figure out how to make it into a cohesive story and tie it all together. And most people really liked it, but unfortunately one of the players wasn't all that happy. So he sent us a letter to our fan magazine and got printed. And we read it out loud. Dear sir, I am returning this game, Zak McKracken, because I find it quite unsuitable. The excellent gameplay ability and graphics further compounds the real problem. The game is saturated with new age Satanism teachings and concepts. The following are a few that I and others have come across. Eastern religions and meditation. African witchcraft and magic. A medium, a spiritual guru, a religious devotee. A person converts to an Eastern religion. A superior guardian race of ancient ones. One religion over all of time and all of the world. Communication by aliens through dreams. Out-of-body experiences, mind linking with animals. Changing of consciousness. Mind over matter, telepathy. Mental telepathy. Mind control by aliens. He left out teleportation, by the way. I think that was an important one. I not only find these false teachings objectionable, but consider the immersing of them in humor and presenting them as a game very dangerous. Not any of this was mentioned in advertisements for the game. I implore you to at least make it clear to unaware buyers that this is a new age game that deals with religion. As a computer consultant and part-time youth pastor, I have an obligation to others in this regard. I will await your response before deciding how to further fulfill my responsibilities to warn others. Reverend Merwin Updike, Altoona, Pennsylvania. So he actually did a really good job describing everything that was in the game. We didn't change the game, obviously. Steve Purcell did the cover. It's actually kind of what he looks like. He based on his own face. Back of the box, after being able to be on the Rescue and Frackless box myself, we ended up with both Matthew Kane, who's my co-designer on the game and co-scripter, and myself. And notice we both have beards. Well, Matthew had a beard anyway, but my beard was grown during the creation of the game. I figured that maybe if I didn't shave for 9 months, I could get back like 16 hours that I could use to finish the game earlier. So that's how it happened. We ended up putting in the National Inquisitor newspaper, which was part of the, that was really Zak McKracken's job, was as a reporter. Put it inside the box, partly to help you with hints, but also to add more color to the whole thing. And I didn't have anything to do with writing this, but I loved it. It was great. But there are a lot of helpful hints in there. Okay, a little bit of video from this. So I'm sick of making up stupid stories that make up stories that aren't stupid. So Zak gets sent to Seattle to do a story on this two-headed squirrel, which has been terrorizing tourists up there, hikers. And while he's there, he uncovers, before he goes there, he has this amazing dream, and ends up connecting with aliens who are very instrumental to the whole plot. The idea is that there are these bad aliens that are trying to take over the world. They're very, very stupid. They realize that they can never conquer Earth with their low level of intelligence, so their goal is to make humanity stupider than they are by sending a 60-cycle hum through all the phone lines. This is before cell phones, so I don't know how that would work now. I guess you could just do it through Bluetooth, maybe. Kane did all the music for this also. So in the game, the aliens use cowboy hats with holes cut out of them and Groucho nose glasses as their disguise. And that's so they look more human than they would otherwise. So this is, that was the original C64 version. This was the EGA version we did for PC. And this is the 256 color version we did for FM Towns. And those are the aliens without their disguises. Had a character named Annie Laris in the game, which was loosely based on my wife, whose maiden name was Annie Laris. This is the guru that you meet in Kathmandu. And one of the things you get to do in the game is mind link with, you learn how to mind link with animals and can then control them as if you were them. This is before I read Game of Thrones, so I don't know if they copied us or we copied them. You actually end up traveling all over the planet and also to Mars. Because I really wanted to, after spending 6 months stuck in the Maniac Mansion, I really wanted to expand the universe and get to play in. So, you know, Mars was also part of it, and that was because David Spangler told me about these photos that came back from NASA from a probe that went to Mars that looked like there was a face that was on the surface. So there I am with my Zak McKracken shirt, and I had finally shaved. Let's see. Okay. So the next game that I got to work on was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. And as with Labyrinth, we didn't have a lot of time to do the game. We were actually started doing it. I think Noah Faustin was first on the project in around November, December, before the film came out in June. We finally got to do something with the core Lucasfilm intellectual property. We had a similar situation that we did for Labyrinth, which was how do we make the game work for people who've seen the movie or not? In this case, we figured by far most people have seen the movie by the time they play the game. So we didn't want to have the movie give away too much. But we did have the script, so we started with the script. And we had some production shots, and we had, you know, stills that were taken on the sets, so we had an idea of what some of the sets look like. So how do we do this? Do we follow the movie exactly and let the movie give away the puzzles, or do we make up our own and alienate film fans? And we ended up kind of doing between the two. We ended up going with the idea that we would use a lot of the scenes, but kind of show action that happened between things that happened in the movie. So setups and kind of maybe the expanded edition of it. This was the first game where we ended up doing special case animation. Like in the lower left, we see Indy reaching up, and that was all done by Stephen Purcell, and created a new editor so he could do the animation on top of a pre-drawn background and put together. The other two scenes were, we figured we had to do some kind of a fighting thing because Indy hits people a lot. So that was an option, but we try to make sure that you get through the game without having to use fighting as the only solution. So often there were 2 or 3 ways to get through a bunch of the puzzles. And because of that, we ended up creating something called Indy quotient points, IQ points, where we would, over multiple playthroughs of the game, we would track which ways you solve puzzles and give you points for each time you solved a puzzle a different way. And so you can only get your maximum number of points by multiple playthroughs. Here are the artists at the ranch. That on the left, Martin Bucky Cameron, unfortunately no longer with us. Ken Macklin, Steve Purcell, who's still at Pixar now, he's directing films there. And Mark Ferrari, who worked with us on Thimbleweed Park. And there's the inspiration for the train we used in the beginning. We thought about using the whole Young Indy piece, but we decided that we just didn't have the time for it. And we didn't have time to show this either. So the game opens, I'll show you this up. So here's the inspiration for the game, or the train. So the only reference to the opening scene was Indy walking in, dripping wet, and just allude to it. So it's a little in joke. If you happen to see the movie, you'd understand it. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't know. So some of the other changes we did with this game came up with, we used the verb interface, we started cutscenes. We also did a dialogue interface. So this is the first of the games we did where we had dialogue trees where you could have essentially a puzzle by talking. And we figured that was really critical to carry the story along and let you feel like you were actually making choices with the dialogue. So here's an example of that. And going for fun, but also adding some replayability if you didn't hit some of the choices the first time. So obviously the piece in the upper left corner was from the movie. Here's an example of a scene which we really only got a few production stills, so we really didn't know exactly how it would appear in the film. And there's a whole sequence in the movie. I think what we happened, we wanted to lose Marcus. I think in the movie he was with Indy the whole time, but we want to get rid of it. We had to come up with another puzzle that would work here. We did use a bit with this, with him breaking into the ground, but we needed a way to make it gameplay, turn the gameplay. So we had to modify the way that the floor looked and the whole room looked. So in the movie, Indy has to go down below this, and this is where the catacombs are. In the game, we do keep the bit with the guy crashing, but I don't think we did the timing. We didn't have to worry about that. But we had to figure out where you had to dig. It's more special case animation at the time. And this is what I showed you before. So 3 years ago, I had the honor of being invited to speak at the Cervignano, if I pronounce it properly, film festival. And this was the 30th anniversary of Zak McKracken. So that's Fabio Bertolotti as the MC there. And we got to bring in Matthew Kane via Skype. So we got to both talk and answer questions to the audience. But of course, since this is my first time in Italy, I loved it there. And I had to go to the same place where that scene was filmed in Indy. There I am standing in front of what was supposed to be a library. It's actually had been a church that was now converted to a museum. Library interior is very different. The India also came with a bunch of pack-in materials, and we used a Grail diary partly for, because it made sense out for the movie, but partly as a copy protection thing. Made it hard for you to play the game without, in fact, close to impossible to play it without the diary, because there are random things that would happen. You'd have to refer to the diary to figure out what to do in different instances, like eventually which Grail cup to get. And it was a lot better than the older ways we used with copy protection, using like wheels or secret codes you have to enter. It add a lot of color to the game. During the game, since there are 3 designers on it, we all were kind of sensitive to how do you make it feel fair to feature all of us without one of us getting top billing, since it was pretty much equal creation between Ron Gilbert, myself, and Noah Faustine. I think I mentioned that. Ron and I both came on the game to help Noah, primarily because of the tight schedule. We realized we only had like 6 months till the film came out, so we had to really push hard to get it done. So we, for the opening scene, we kind of staggered our names, so it's not really clear. Noah's on the top, but Ron's on the left, and it kind of made it seem like we're kind of even without giving us top billing, one of us top billing. We had issues with some game stuff. There was one incident where near the end of the game, Ron had given me some dialogue to pop in for the end sequence, which was very irreverent and very tongue-in-cheek. And I popped it in, and then Noah gave me some dialogue which was much closer to the film, and I wasn't sure what was going on here. So we had a meeting, and both of them felt that theirs was the way that we had to go, and they both really wanted their dialogue to be included, the other irreverent one or the more serious one. So I ended up creating using a random number generator to choose both of different segments for both of their dialogues. So it changes slightly depending on which version you end up using. I'm going to skip through this. Also, in the end credits, this is randomized, so you could have one of 3 different ways that this would show up. Finally got to see a screening of the movie maybe a couple of months before it came out at Paramount. So we flew down to Los Angeles and went to the first official screening there, and saw several scenes that we had in the game based on the script that had been cut from the movie. One in particular was this whole sequence that we have in the game where you have a radio operator on a Zeppelin that you're on, and you are trying to keep him from sending out messages, and you end up, I think, fighting with him and knocking him out. And in the movie, whoops, I guess we got lost out. So in the movie, there's a whole sequence that says when Indy and his father Henry are in the kind of this labyrinth or maze of girders inside the Zeppelin, Indy says, "I thought it would take them a lot longer to figure out the radio was dead." And in the film, it makes absolutely no sense, because we never see the radio operator or that whole sequence. And only someone who played the game would understand what the reference was, how that worked. So film credits, Indiana Jones. I think that's my slides for now, and I'm available for questions. So I give it back to you guys.
Thank you, David. This was a wonderful insight in your career. Ok, allora, per adesso non abbiamo domande, le potete scrivere in chat, qui su Zoom. David, I'm going to collect the questions for you.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Okay. First question by Federica. Federica says, I'm guessing there must have been hard times during your career. Were there times when you felt like giving up? What motivated you to keep going?
Well, when I was at Lucas, I don't remember, I mean, the hard times would be when you get to a certain point in the game and you realize that you are going to miss your deadline and you have to keep on crunching or working harder. We were really lucky in that, as compared to some other companies, we were never forced to ship games before they were ready to go. So if a game wasn't ready, we would usually get an extension. There was still pressure to get it done, but we had a pretty strong edict that we wouldn't ever, don't ship shit. Was really what the line was. we wouldn't ship anything that was before its time. We also didn't have pressure from marketing, to at least while I was there, to do specific kinds of games. So they weren't coming back and saying, we need a game that's like this. It was really driven by the designers. The flow was the designer would come up with a game. They would pass around maybe a 1 or 2 page description to the other game designers and people in the group and get feedback. And then if it got thumbs up, we would go further with it. So it was all coming from us rather than from someone upstairs or from marketing. George Lucas also really wasn't very much involved, other than those first meetings he had with me and Dave Levine on our games. He rarely would come by and talk to us or show us stuff. So very much hands off. So originally I felt like the huge disappointment that we weren't going to get to do Star Wars games when I was there. In retrospect, that was really a blessing, because we had the total freedom to do what we wanted and to find our own voice and to experiment without worrying that we were going to mess up or sully the name of the company, the Star Wars, the name. That totally changed, I think, after I left. Star Wars became pretty much the only thing they were doing, and because they were doing Star Wars, there was way more hands-on from George Lucas, especially in the 2000s. I heard some stories about him requiring changes in some of the games they were doing that cost huge delays by having to rework the game design and throw out huge parts of the artwork that had been created. So we were super lucky during the time I was there. So going back to the question, I think Labyrinth might have been the most difficult game that I worked on, and partly because there was the time pressure for the movie. There was issues with some choices between me and the other lead on the project and how we wanted to proceed, and it was uncomfortable. So that was not my favorite project at the time. But most of the time I was there, things were great. It was like, are we going to? And there is a point when you're crunching where you feel like you're never going to get to the end. That's probably the worst part. But you don't really have a choice to give up, so you just keep going. Hope that answers the question.
Okay. So let's see if there are other questions. Okay, another one. David, can you actually read the chat on Zoom?
I do see it, yes.
Oh, okay. We have the question there. If you prefer to read the questions.
Sure.
So the next one is, what do you think about today's graphic adventure? Have you tried anyone?
Well, I did play Thimbleweed Park.
and play tested.
And play tested. I played it too much. I I'm strange in that I'm not a huge game player. I'll tend to play a game, if I do play it, to get a sense of what someone did and what might be new in it. I might get that from watching a walkthrough or streaming, a playthrough of the game. The games I've been playing mostly lately are probably on VR and Quest, as opposed to 2D adventures. So the answer is kind of no, that I haven't, but I'm aware of them to some degree. I think part of the problem for me as it maybe as a game designer is that it's hard to get into the game without constantly thinking about everything that I would have done differently, or being angry at something which I don't like the way it was done, and say, oh, this is a terrible way to do this or that. So I'm pretty particular about that. I guess it's kind of like maybe if I were a food critic, it'd be hard to go to a restaurant without being in my food critic mode. So I definitely appreciate really good design when I see it, and I just don't play enough games to do it. My most fun thing to do is to create games. So if I have time to do it, I'll probably be working on a game instead of playing one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, actually, I have a question for you. Okay, while waiting for other questions, my question is: there are fields where a wrong final decision can actually change a product's fate. I think about CD mixing, for example. Okay, a wrong mix can ruin an album. Okay, does this happen in the video game industry?
Yeah, I'm sure. Excuse me. You could easily go down a path on a game which where the designer thinks this is the best thing ever. It's brilliant. It's really fun. It's great. And then if you're doing the proper thing, you end up with playtesting, where you bring in people who maybe one at a time who've never played the game before, sit them down in front of the computer and watch them play, and then have them, and don't give them hints, which is super hard. You always want to say, oh no, just push that over there, click on that. You can't do that. You have to.
I know it.
Yes, so you have to watch and just ask them to describe what they're thinking, what are they trying to do now, and try to see the game from someone's point of view who's never seen it before. And that can be very painful and super illuminating, because you realize, okay, this whole thing, which we thought was totally obvious, the player, at least this player, is totally missing the point, or they're lost, or they lost the thread of what the story was, or they got into a situation they don't know. There's so many things to do, and they have no idea what to do next, or something you think was really funny, they're not even laughing at, or we have all those things. So you do a lot of play testing. It's totally different than bug testing. This is where you're really looking at how the gameplay works.
Okay.
And if you're doing it properly, you do enough of it so you get a really good sense of what works and what doesn't work. And you can't be really precious with your good ideas. You have to be willing to cut sections of the game or add new sections, or in the case of, say, Thimbleweed Park, since it was a Kickstarter funded campaign, people who were, and we advertised the game as, we promoted the game as like, here's a game which was very much a throwback to, or should remind you of the games like that you played in the 80s and 90s for Lucasfilm, as if you found an old Lucasfilm game you didn't know about in your drawer. in your desk, and you put it into your computer and played it. So we did a lot of fan service. We did a lot of things which were in-jokes and hints back to our earlier games. And we kind of forgot that the backers weren't going to be the only ones playing the game. And soon after we launched the game, some of the negative feedback we got was that there's too much self-referential humor, too many in-jokes, it was being too punny or too all these different things. So we added an option. So we, by default, we turned off the in-jokes or the annoying in-jokes, and you had to turn them on. And then and the toilet paper
direction too.
Yeah.
There was a lot of
that was also
discussion by fans.
Yeah, that was also an in-joke that we kept. I don't think that was an option, but that came out of a discussion. I think when Mark Ferrari did the room the first time, he did with the toilet paper facing towards the wall, and me and much of other people, I think it turned out to be 75% of people put their toilet paper so that
the other direction,
so it goes the other way. And learned that people who have cats in their houses realize that if you do it that way, the cat is going to do this, the toilet paper roll, and unwind it. So people with cats in their houses will put it the other way. But it became this kind of farcical discussion online with one of the magazines getting pretended to be outraged that we'd have the toilet paper roll facing the wrong way and all that. So we gave an option to the player to turn it, had to flip it. That was more of an in-joke.
Yeah.
But anyway, just realizing, so having to go back and make adjustments. And we probably could have done more playtesting with Thimbleweed Park if we had more time to do that. But that's really critical to find out. And then also be flexible afterwards. So we did make some changes to the game after it released based on that.
And about playtesting, you had some critics on the final part of the game, because not anyone understood the breaking of the fourth wall,
right,
that the game does.
Yeah, so that's one of those love it, hate it kind of things. The original design for the game didn't include that. That was something that Ron came up with, maybe halfway through the game project, and we had all this. I don't want to give away spoilers here, but we had all this art, which was, the way we would create the game was
programmer art.
Yeah, use programmer art. Really rough, call it wireframe art is what we were referring to it as. But find a way to get the game running really, really fast without good art, to get a flow of the game, a sense of the size of the universe, get a bunch of puzzles working, and then realize which rooms we could cut before we spend all the time to do a really highly rendered version of it. So we had all those rooms and we ended up being able to use them at the end, but that wasn't the main reason. I think it was, Ron really loves unusual endings, or kind of twisty endings. People who played Monkey Island, Monkey Island 2 especially, will know that. So some people loved it and some people hated it. And we knew it was going to be controversial, and that was Ron's creative choice to do that.
Okay, I loved it. Okay,
good.
I loved it. Okay, so we have 5 questions, and the first one is really fast. Your favorite game?
What is my favorite game?
Yeah. If you have one.
Say again, if I had one?
Yeah.
Well, I probably like Monkey Island 2. That became a favorite for a long time. I really like Portal, but I had trouble with motion sickness after a while. so I wanted to play more of it, but I kept on, I think the first person movement stuff was getting me sick. Of recent games, probably on Quest would be Beat Saber. It's a beautifully creative
VR game.
VR game, yeah.
VR game, yeah.
And if I had more time to play games, I'd probably give you more.
Okay. So we go on with the second question. What has inspired you through the years, whether for work or not? And what gives you inspiration lately?
Let me think about that. Well, my wife, definitely. I mean, we have long talks about all sorts of things and walks and hikes and I think we kind of contribute inspiration back and forth between each other on that area. I really miss traveling. I loved going to Italy, and then in 2019 we went to Germany, and also 2018 went to Japan. And I get all sorts of inspiration from immersing myself in other cultures and seeing great places, and either historically important places or artistically or just beautiful scenery. I'm probably inspired a lot by certain TV shows and from movies, and those, I mean, clearly Star Wars inspired me way back, because that got me going with my first games. I love time travel movies, especially if they're consistently hold together, if there aren't any big plot holes. Back to the Future, I thought was almost a perfect movie. Everything just tied together perfectly. The sequels, not so much.
Okay.
The other area, I mean, really, when I first started getting into games, the impetus for this was the idea of being inside of a interactive environment. VR is getting close to that, but I was picturing kind of an interactive Disneyland, and that was when we were thinking of what I wanted to do with my life. In the mid-70s, I was imagining going to a Disneyland where everything was interactive, and instead of having attractions which were hardwired to be the same every time, it would shift. And figure, okay, if I'm ever going to do that, I need to learn about computers and learn games, and that was really the driving force. When I first joined Lucasfilm, I told Peter, and then later I told Steve Arnold, when he became the manager, that this was really what I wanted to do eventually, was something that was much more immersive. And clearly we were going to do home games first, but in 1990, Steve asked me if I could be the director of operations for a year to kind of transform from a flat hierarchy of the company where everyone was reporting to him, to bring in more mid-level managers and kind of take over to help set that up. With the promise that after a year of that, I could hire someone to replace myself and then do a location-based entertainment project where it would be much more like the immersive kinds of games I really was interested in doing. And that's what happened. I mean, I got to the last 2 years I was there, I was working on this project called Mirage, which was essentially a flight simulator. We partnered with Hughes Simulation, which does all the professional flight simulators, and essentially did the Star Wars game that I wanted Rescue on Fractalus to be, flying through mountains, but shooting. This time you're in an X-wing shooting up TIE fighters, and we had a $1 million at the time $1 million image generator from Evans and Sutherland, and 3 video projectors giving you a 120-degree field of view, and a mirror that you're looking out of, which collimating mirror, which made you focus at 100 feet out there instead of 3 feet away or 5 feet away. So it felt like you were flying through these vast landscapes, and we had surround sound, and it was multiplayer. We had other people playing on stations to fight against you. So all the enemies you were fighting were actual people under the planes. And the idea was that this would be the basis of a platform which would go into theme parks that people would do different games for. But the cost at the time to get these 60 frame per second anti-aliased graphics with fog and different effects was way too expensive for anyone to want to do it. So we were just too early. Now you could do way better without on your iPhone. So we were just too early. But that whole idea is still inspiring. And so VR, I think, is the closest we've come. Also, what Disney's now doing, both with, say, Smuggler's Run experience, which I haven't gotten to see yet because of COVID. We're planning to go down to LA to check that out. And they're actually working on a Star Cruiser hotel in Orlando, where you book, you get on for like 3 days, 2 nights, 3 days, 2 nights. You get your own cabin. You're essentially on a starship, and it's like, think a simulated cruise ship, except it's in space. And they're actors, they're characters who play the different roles. It's all Star Wars based, and there's things you could do, lightsaber training, and do all sorts of things there. Then you could do a excursion via the shuttle to the port where the town, the Star Wars town that they have at Disneyland or Disney World. And kind of scary during the pandemic to think about being holed up in a hotel with hundreds of other people like that, where you can't leave ever. But I'm sure by the time they open, hopefully that'll be past. We'll be in a better position. But that long form of immersive entertainment is really compelling to me. There's a book series called Dream Park by Larry Niven and Stephen Barnes from the early 80s, which kind of talks a lot about this kind of thing. So I'm super excited by that.
Okay. Thank you. We have another question. Did you think to take part in a new production? We do not want to break any NDA, of course.
Right, I am working on a game now. Well, working on 2 projects. So I took the Rube Goldberg game that we did 7 years ago, and we've been adapting it for the Quest, for VR and for AR. So that's in progress. It's kind of slow going because we're kind of doing it part-time, but it's fully, the first few levels are completely playable, and it's really fun. You can reach in with your hands without a controller and pick up objects and move them around and connect strings, and pretty much like if you look at Rubrick's videos of it, I think I have one on an early version of a YouTube video of that. And I am working on a project with Ron Gilbert's company. Yeah, another graphic adventure, but that's all I can say about that at this point.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, like I said before, working on a game is my game. I mean, if you think about all the things that, especially in a puzzle game, you're trying to solve puzzles. Well, your programming is essentially a game, because you're trying to figure out why things are not working, and you have this satisfaction when you get something wired up and it does work, and the animation works or the sound works, and all of a sudden something which was an idea turns into a real explorable location. And there's something magical happens when you can do that.
So you solve puzzles to let we solve the puzzles.
Yeah, and I think that's it's true. And I think, I don't know if this is from Lucas because I was at Lucasfilm, but with the discussions we had about our players, but the idea that that the most fun part is when I'm coding and I come up with a good idea that I put in the game, and I imagine a player who discovers it and laughs or enjoys it or has a good experience. And so that's always in my mind, that I'm picturing the people having a blast playing it afterwards.
Okay, so we have a similar question, but is this: do you have any plans to create another game in the future? So I think our friend is referring to a production directed by you.
Yeah, that is a good question. Someone asked me once, for example, would I do if I had the opportunity to do a sequel to, say, Zak McKracken or something, would I do it? And there was a point where that was an easy yes. In fact, right after Disney bought Lucasfilm, a bunch of us were in negotiation to try to get the rights to do some of those games. And, it was me and Tim Schafer were in meetings to talk about that. And Tim ended up, Disney was not willing to talk to small companies. Mm-hmm. And Tim's solution was to work with Sony and have Sony be the big guy to negotiate. And they got the rights to, they got to redo some of their games. But even those weren't sequels. Those were, republishing, updated versions of them. Mm-hmm. I'm less interested in doing a remake of Zak. I kind of find, I like the original versions of games more than I like remakes of them. Ron Gilbert refers to it as like it's more like someone taking your black and white film noir movie and colorizing it without consent, or changing, dubbing it or doing something else. Yeah. Or George going back to the Star Wars movies, he did it himself, but adding new special effects and redoing it, and changing some scenes. Who shot first? Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of like the idea that something I created is what it was. In the case of Rubrics, the Rube Goldberg game, bringing it into a different environment where I getting to add some different kinds of experience is fun. And I was partially doing it because I wanted an easy way into a VR game, relatively easy. And we already had it in Unity, and I figured, okay, this would be fairly straightforward, and it's not. there's all sorts of things you have to figure out. But it's a really great learning experience to do it, and it's going to be fun to when it comes out. But to revisit something I did before, I don't know, to do a sequel based on it, to go back in a universe, and then do I want to spend 2 or 3 years of my life doing that? I don't know. That's a really good question. If it were a VR type experience, it would be probably an easier answer. So I think if I think about that, like, would I be willing to manage or run a VR game, or be involved, even if it wasn't mine, if it was, if I was one of the collaborators on a project, then for sure I would do that.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a non-answer. Like, it's really, I don't know.
Okay, so we have a last question. Okay, new technologies change the genre. Do you think is a good thing? Or maybe new graphic adventures miss some of the original vintage flavor? And so maybe because that some of the new are a little bit old style, maybe in search of that flavor.
Yeah, there's, we kind of came up against this in Thimbleweed Park.
With touch screens.
Yeah, we did a really nice version for the Switch where you have the option of using touchscreen or controllers or both. But in terms of being true to the form of the original point and click style with verbs versus, going to something more like, some people refer to some of the games as walking simulators, where you're not doing a lot of interactivity, but you're more exploring. I think you could take the experience of the exploration of real interactivity in a graphic adventure, and obviously lose the verb interface. We intentionally chose that in Thimbleweed Park because of the promise of what we were offering to people as an experience similar to ones you had before. We did a year ago, Ron and I did a game called Dolores, which was based in the Thimbleweed Park universe. It was kind of like a free game we did during the lockdown from the pandemic. And we both had a lot of extra time on our hands and we wanted to do something fun for the fans. So we were experimenting with other ways to do the interface on that one. And that one, instead of having all the verbs available, you have a little pull-down menu that pops up with options that you could choose based on what you're clicking on. And that in some ways that's similar to the coin type interface that was used later on in LucasArts days. But here we weren't limited to like 4 or 5 verbs. We could come up with whatever verb we wanted to, and I like that. That it didn't feel constraining. It flowed more like a story would, I think, where you're not locked down to trying to force the puzzle into these 9 or whatever verbs you have. You choose the verbs or the descriptions that match the situation at the time. I think that worked pretty well. I think there's another question too, is like, are today's players interested in the intense puzzle solving needed for a lot of the graphic adventures? Mm-hmm. Do they have the patience to do that? Or they prefer to move through the game really fast? I think in Thimble, we tried to help with some of that by giving you an easy version you could play, easy mode. Yeah. So you could do with maybe half the puzzles shortcutted. We also did it with giving you a hint system, built into the game, so you could, without giving away too much, or without going to a walkthrough which might give away more than you actually wanted to see, you could kind of control it more clearly and get hints that would give more and more detail. So I think it's possible, but I don't know where the interest is. Well, we'll see.
Okay. Okay, so we have 2 comments on YouTube saying Stance agrees on the Monkey Island 2 being a favorite game.
Yeah.
And Martin says, yes, please do not touch Zak. It is perfect.
Yeah, but it's interesting because on Zak too, like I did not work on the FM Towns version, the 256 color one, mm-hmm. and didn't really have much involvement in that. And I don't know. I think my favorite was probably the EGA version in terms of the color space. I think we got overboard, maybe went overboard with the colors. It got a little garish in places. It's like this is the first time the artist had 256 colors to work with, and they wanted to use every single one of them in every screen. So yeah. So yeah, thank you for that.
Okay. Okay, so one last question by Ramon. Zak McKracken is the first game that predicted back in the 80s that people will hardly ever pay with cash in the future. Did you have a foresight back then that people would predominantly pay with credit cards?
Yeah, pretty much. We had our cash cards that you had to fill up, so it was similar. We had credit cards back then, but I rarely use cash. Now for me, it's a mix between credit cards and my phone, where I'm just tapping my phone on the screen. And, the last 2 times I went to restaurants, actually have gone back to restaurants now again, a couple of times. And on the receipt, there's a little QR code. You put your phone on it, and it brings up a UI on the phone where you pay through an app. And so you're never even giving them your credit card or touching your phone. And I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah. So, I guess at some point we're going to have embedded chips, and we'll just do the thing where you wave your hand over the thing and you get charged credits built in. So that's where we'll be in 20 years from now. I guess the closest thing is to have your watch, but I don't wear watches anymore, so stuck with a clunky phone.
Okay, so any upcoming project for Electric Eggplant beside RubeWorks in VR?
Probably not. Annie is working on novels right now. She's writing, so not likely. We don't want to be the publisher for that. Hopefully she'll find a mainstream publisher, but if not, then that's a possibility. But other than that, I don't have anything lined up. I'm kind of booked up for the next year or so, I'll have to revisit after that.
Okay, David, this is this was the last question, so I think we are done. We really say thank you for your time. It was an honor to have you with us.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. I hope that was of value.
Yeah, it was, certainly.
Good.
Okay, so have a nice day. I'm going to close in Italian for the friends.
Okay.
Ok. Ok ragazzi, noi abbiamo finito con David, lo ringraziamo, vi ricordo gli appuntamenti di domani. Ci sarà un talk con Domenico Barba, David Wise, un talk di Stefano Maccarinelli, e poi ci sarò anch'io con un talk sul sound design. Quindi vi lascio gli appuntamenti di domani. Mi raccomando, se non l'avete fatto ancora, iscrivetevi sul portale in maniera tale da poter interagire con noi con delle domande. A domani. Bye David, thank you very much. Bye. Have a nice day.
Okay.